Welcome to the riskadvisor.com podcast. I am Jim Henry and here with my good friend and co-host Sal Lavreri. Today's topic, saved money is not money saved. How many times have we seen this? CEOs and security directors try to go with the cheapest price. Here's a little free advice, pay now or pay later. Except when it comes to risk assessments, where the bigger the price tag, the better. Except when you get stuck with identified writing risks that haunt you for a long, long time. So, Sal, what's your thoughts on those points in our subject for today?
A real pain point for me happens to be when the companies go out and they ask for risk assessments to be done. And I know we're going to be talking about general contractors and the overall scope of things and the pricing, but the real pain point for me is on the risk assessments where you get a company goes out, they want a facility needs a risk assessment done, they get it, they get the risk assessment, and the thing that they wind up getting is a list of liabilities. They really don't get a whole lot of answers. What they're getting is liabilities. I had one particular customer who had a risk assessment done, and they called me up and they said, can you kind of help us with this? And well, what's the problem? And they said, well, there were recommendations that we just can't fix. He's like, what's that? And they said, well, it was in New York City, a major cross street that runs literally right down the middle of crosses Manhattan Island. And the recommendation was to prevent explosives from blowing up the building, prevent truck traffic from being in the middle of the street. And it's just an unreasonable recommendation. I mean, it's just something that is just a problem. And if there was ever an explosion or an explosive device brought to the building, they'd always come back and say, well, you knew about the risk. What did you do about it? And it's stupid things like it goes from the ridiculous to the sublime sometimes. And that's just one of those pain points with it. But I know even before we get to the risk assessments, we have to get into looking at those systems that are put into place, and that's stuff that we really want to get into today. So, Jim, what do you think?
Well, I think this is going to be a topic we could talk for 2 weeks on. So we'll try and keep on point, which can be a challenge for me. But so today's guest, bringing in more of the systems integrator perspective, and again, many decades of experience, like myself, is Howard Schild, who was the principal and founder of Advanced Electronic Solutions, Inc., AES. He founded that in 1994, and AES has become one of the, or if not the largest privately owned security systems integrator in the New York metro area and serves clients throughout the United States. Welcome, Howard.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
So, two problems that we're going to talk about here in the first segment. And the first one is cost is king. So let's talk about the process of how a job gets quoted and who runs the bid, particularly when a general contractor is involved.
Correct. Well, we certainly have a lot of experience with that. I mean, in most of the projects, certainly that you get involved in these days that are large projects, the GC does get involved. And going back, as you said, many decades, originally, way back when, the consultants did have a lot of sway into who did get a project, and they looked at it more carefully, I think, from the point of view of the experience of the contractor as well as the technical expertise. It seems now with the change to the GCs controlling so much of it, it's more about the nuts and bolts. And do you have your BIM in the job? Do you have the proper insurance? Do you have these different items that I think often are not really having to do with your technical expertise, where you're being looked at, very frankly, as the drywall guy or the guy putting in the carpeting, where we have a much longer life with the customer and we go for a much longer period and we have to service and maintain the systems. So I think that's where I've seen such a big change in the industry now, where very often, in fact, in the old days, the consultants would even do risers and very complete packages to bid from. And now, obviously, because of cost cutting, the packages are much smaller. They very rarely do a riser package without getting too technical, but the specifications themselves is very minimal. And I think they're under the gun too. I think, more often than not, sometimes, one of the funny aspects of this is I sometimes see, everybody's doing cut and paste these days, and they sometimes see the wrong customer, on actually the specification because of the cut and paste, and that little part got inside, not at the header and the footer, but inside within the spec itself. They have the wrong customer.
That's the whole time with the green M&M. I know I'm gonna screw this up, but there was a rock band. I don't know if it was Queen or Kiss or whoever it was, but there was a rock band who, in their agreement, was that they did not want any brown M&Ms in the dressing room. They wanted bowls of M&Ms, but they did not want any brown M&Ms. And the entire concept was, if they walked in and found brown M&Ms, nobody was paying attention. And they said, if you can't pay attention to this, what else are you missing?
Right.
And it's a great lesson learned.
Well, that those sparse specs wouldn't be as damning if indeed the filter on the selection of the integrator was conscious of the fact that the integrator does need to bring in a lot of knowledge and complement, the design. And, not all GCs, but some, will try and broaden the net on the candidates, for a project to drive the price down. And they need that additional input, to fill in the gaps, on a design, but they aren't going to get it, when they're going to be, opening it up to integrators that are more contractors, I'd say, than integrators, because they're not bringing in that domain knowledge, the experience and the technical expertise from the design side to complement, the basic framework that's been laid out by a consulting firm.
Mm-hmm. And, one of the interesting things that's happened to us in the past, and, this comes up sometimes with, the idea of value engineering projects. And that's often, we're requested to do that, which is, puts us in kind of an odd position because a consultant was hired to write the specification. We're asked to value engineer. If we come up with things that we think are opposed to what the design consultant came up with, then we, wind up with a possible alienation of the people that were originally involved in the design. But, one of the things that happened to us a couple of times, and this is because of our industry start changing so much, and not really actually pretty much from a value engineering point of view, but the idea that as we moved from way back when in 2000 from VCRs to DVRs, we had a big client that we did a very large project in the city, and the consultant was still at that point doing the VCR thing. And they had just come out with DVRs, I think using like 20 megabyte drives in there. Now we're up to, 80 terabytes and stuff like that. But at that point, it was very early on, and I understand the consultant, was probably reluctant. It was a new technology, but we suggested it to the customer. And actually, the customer thought it was a brilliant idea, and they went with DVRs, some of the earliest DVRs that were out there, those Intellex units, actually, which I'm sure, Jim, you're probably familiar with. I don't know, Sal, maybe?
Jim goes back to the days of tubes.
Exactly. Yeah. So we came up with that, and then a little later on a hospital project that we were bidding, it was during the changeover to NVRs, and it was the days that this hospital already had like 1,000 cameras, and in those days, you could always find where the security office was because you could walk down the hallway and see the drooping ceiling tiles because there's like 9,000 pounds of coax up in the ceiling. And you just follow that down. You knew where the security office was. So at that point, I guess that's about 10 years ago or so, when the industry was changing from DVRs, which was still using coax, but moving to NVRs. And we suggested that, and they loved the idea.
Well, when you bring up an interesting point, when you have a design consultant and you're looking at it, and then you're coming in for the value engineering, that from the end user side of it, it's almost an appropriate approach, because at least you got a design engineer that's going to understand the tech and the spec and everything that you need, and at least you hope that they're talking at somewhat on the same level, and you can have an intelligent discussion or a conversation about it, or a debate. I was involved with a project that was a government issue, a government project, and the general contractor was cutting stuff out again on the pricing and didn't understand the requirements. And, we were looking at stuff, as simple as, dual redundancies coming in from the telecommunications lines. And it's, wanted it fed from two different central offices. And he's looking and he's going, "What are you, crazy? We just need one line coming in." And yeah, but what happens when the guy with the backhoe comes out after the building is built, digs up the line and cuts us? We need another. They don't understand that. And it all comes down to the price. And,
yeah, I recall, what was it? I guess 10 years ago or so, when that backhoe was working out, I think in Jersey, and they cut the lines and the airports were out. Do you remember that?
Mm-hmm.
That was pretty wild. I guess somebody didn't have the right as-built at that point, but I remember that.
As
well, wild stuff.
Yeah. Well, the importance of having that collaborative relationship between the integrator, the end user, and the consultant, along with the GC at the table, is, really important, because, how many times have we seen, a consultant is brought in and, he's really trying to cover himself and point out all of the issues that, that need to be addressed from a security and a risk perspective. And that may not necessarily line up with the budget.
Yeah.
And sometimes, that deployment goes out there and, it's driving the price up. We talked about driving the price down by bringing in unqualified integration. Well, this can drive the scope up. So the key is, if you are going to try and bring that down within a reasonableness to the budget, it really needs to be a collaborative effort. And we both had the experience, where a consulting firm is receptive to input, from the integrator. And we've seen other circumstances, where the consulting firm will dig their heels in, or they're excused from the process entirely, by the GC. They write this abstract, set of requirements out there, and now the integrator is left there, with the GC, going through what's going to be eliminated. And then the consultant's brought back in later in the project and goes, "What happened to my project?" So I'm sure you've had that, that experience as well. And like I said, we there's good and bad of every stakeholder. I don't care whether it's the general contractor, integrators, manufacturers, what have you. The key is to understand that this is good projects. Generally, are a team effort. With collaboration between all those stakeholders. So.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. And, very frankly, a few of the groups we work with, like Dusabel, Venture, and Centaur, we've worked with them on many projects over the years. And, it's, as you said, a great collaborative effort, a team effort. They look for our input. And, you have to remember, too, in many times, they're being asked, the consultants, to be fair to them also. They're coming in, as I had described before, we might have already 3 or 4 buildings that we've done, and they're working with the end user very often, determining where, say, readers and cameras are going to go, but they're not quite involved in the infrastructure, especially now with everything being networked, so they don't really understand that part necessarily. So that's why it has to be a collaborative effort at that point. For us to get involved and talk about, hey, where are all the video servers now? How old are the video servers? Do they have to be upgraded? Things like that. So, it's refreshing for us to work with, a group like Dusabella, lady by the name of Maria Gonzalez we do a lot of work with. She's, very well versed in the equipment that's out there. And again, she will work with us to figure out what's really the best best way to proceed for the customer. Because again, it's not just an isolated building anymore. It's these regional systems and national systems, and they're all linked together. And we have to work as a team to make that into a solid system.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break before we go into the second part of the show. We just want to remind the listeners that you're listening to the Risk Advisor podcast hosted by Jim Henry and me, Sal LaFreri. We're going to invite you to subscribe and follow us on our social media like Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We're going to ask you to do us a favor and go to the show, download it, and please write a review and tell us how much you like the show. Your opinion really does matter to us, and we would also like to ask you to share this podcast with your friends and colleagues so we can get the word out about our show. So, going into the second part of this, we want to talk about, when things start to go wrong, when you get the consultant and when you get the design engineer or the customer at the end, when it goes bad. Let's talk a little bit about pulling the customer out of the fire. Some of the things that we see is that there aren't certifications, there aren't issues, that things that the customer doesn't want to pay for up front. Howard, I'm sure you got to have, between you and Jim, you got to have probably a couple of hundred stories about customers that got in trouble, and how do you get them out of the fire? What are some of those things?
Well, I would go back to the certification that you mentioned, certifications and systems, and I would say, certifications are certainly important, but I think experience, personnel is probably more important than the certifications. From my viewpoint, I've seen a lot of people with incredible certifications. It's probably in all industries, not just our industry, with a lot of letters and acronyms, after their name, but not a lot of experience, real world experience. So, from our point of view, whether it's our project managers or our IT folks, I think the experience part is very important. We pride ourselves on our company that, most of the folks that are with us have been with us for many, many years. And that's when I talk to an end user and I do a presentation, I always talk about that. It's not about having thousands of employees. It's really about having the same, half a dozen employees that are going to come and work on your system at your site. But, speaking in terms of, what can happen when customers wind up in a situation where, perhaps, as an example, one of our large customers, they were doing a new site. Actually, in Westchester, they were doing a new site, and the powers to be had actually were thinking of putting in a system that was not the right system because we were presently in another location. This talks to the operations part of the business again, being in sync with the others. We had already started upgrading the system to another system. In fact, we were had already started the upgrade, but some other powers within the company had already decided they wanted to go with another system in another building. And, then we had to get involved. And of course, the GC, saw this as, oh my God, now I got more complications. That's all he saw. But the reality
the two favorite words of the GC, change order.
Yeah, right. But, the reality is it would have cost the customer, probably a few $100,000 after the fact, several months later, just to pull the system out that was, being spec'd as the wrong system at that point. So, these are the kinds of things that we see. And that's why, it goes back to the, Jim's point about being a collaborative effort and a team effort between everybody, between the customer, between the consultant, between the GC and everybody else.
Well, that is that really highlights the title. Save money is not money saved. In some cases, having that broader view, holistically to what the application is, and other considerations, within the client that may not have been evident, when the spec was written for a particular job. is so important, and it may be a little bit more of a derailment or a scope change, with that individual project. But without a doubt, that is going to save the customer long term more money. And it's just, it's a squeamish position because legacy integrators that have long relationships with the operations groups, in these businesses, are then in that pickle, when you're a subcontractor, to the GC on a project, the GC expects you are not going to have any conversations with the end user, other than it's through them. So, you try and do that. But when you run into that situation, where the GC's got his blinders on, he doesn't want his scope to creep, no matter what the implications are to the customer long term. That's where you really have to be creative in how you, and how you get that message across. Because in the long run, the job going south is not in anybody's best interest, and any of the stakeholders that are in the project. So,
yeah, absolutely. No, I agree with that. So,
and one of the things we had a while back, we was talking to a doctor, and she was saying that one of the big problems they have today online is what they call Dr. Google. Everybody comes in and they've already self-diagnosed, right? And now it's pretty much the same thing today, right? With the equipment, you spec out something, you make a recommendation, and they go online and they're coming back with, yeah, but this is saying this and this is saying that, or on the pricing, is problematic. You running into that on your side?
yes, absolutely. I've probably run into that over 100 times at this point. We're quoting systems. We got a camera quoted in there, and cameras are the best. I mean, certain in access control, we use systems that are pretty much only sold through dealers, so there's a certain control over that. Again, due to certifications and experience, but especially now on the video side, and so much so because the IT departments are involved also. And there's definitely some little bit of channel conflict, if that's the way to describe it, where an IT person gets involved and they've bought a few web cameras for some of the stuff they're doing, or a few cameras that they bought that they put in their data centers. So, for instance, we come in, we bid, a project. We have whatever it is, 50, 100, few hundred cameras, and they go on Amazon. They see a price for a camera, and they go, "Oh, we get this camera for $100, and you want to charge us $130 or $140 or whatever." And the reality is that, and we have to go through that whole process. That okay, somebody who's making minimum wage is just putting that in a box and sending it to you. That doesn't include an on-site warranty that right off the bat of a year that we normally would give on a construction project, which right then and there is about another 10% or so. The insurance policies that we have to get on a large construction project. I know, Jim, you could relate to that. It used to be $1 million, $2 million. Now it's $2 million, $4 million. It's quite expensive. New York City, or New York State especially, still has this wonderful scaffold law, which they took away from most of the other states. But because of that, people aren't writing, most of the large insurance companies are not writing insurance in New York for construction anymore. I know this is a little bit off topic, but I remember when they were building the Tappan Zee Bridge, and it was supposed to cost $2 billion, which I'm sure it went way beyond that. But the original price tag for $2 billion included $400 million for insurance. Just to give you some relationship as to what's going on with insurance costs in New York. That was the government doing it. So these are the things that pop up. There's no support at that point. If you buy something from Amazon, there's no on-site support. We all know now there's SSAs, which are software support agreements, which is another topic, but these are things that also require a cost.
Talk to us a little about SSAs, because I'm sure somebody's not too familiar with them.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, software support agreements again, going back to the old days when we were lugging coax around, those things didn't exist. But now it's a very big feature of our industry as we've changed into really on the a software industry at this point and specialized software. And IT departments are used to spending, I'd say, roughly 15 to 20% of the original cost for software support, whether it's a Cisco, whether it's our own company dealing with the Salesforce. They get a very large fee each year to maintain your software and to give you updates and new drivers or whatever it is. Same thing is happening in our industry right now. Interestingly enough, again, tying this back to the thing with the Amazon thing, but the customers now, they're becoming more educated. They realize they need SSAs, which they're same thing. They're paying 15 to 20% probably of the original cost of the software. But when it comes back to the integrator side of the business, and we actually have to go on site and service the systems, we're probably only at about 7 to 10%, something like that. We send a truck out. We have trained people also, whereas the software folks are doing basically everything they do remotely. Very rarely do they send an engineer on site. But it's something that's now become commonplace in our industry to have SSAs, and analytics is, I think, going to be taking over a lot of our industry right now. I think that, the giant control room, when we started in this business, it was like a pile of 9-inch monitors, all piled up on some desk, and like the coax, the desk was collapsing under the weight, and all these things were piled up there. But, now we're getting to a point, and a couple of our customers, we've put in analytical software to actually watch real time what's going on the video system. And it makes more sense to have some very good analytical software and just be looking at certain views that are popping up on one large screen, as opposed to having 8 or 9 or 10 46-inch monitors and thinking that your security staff is looking at all those pictures at the same time, which is really an impossibility. Right. So I see some tremendous advances happening in that using, artificial intelligence. And I think really that's where we're going. And all this, again, SSAs, doesn't matter. It's analytics. They're not selling any hardware. It's all software. That's all they're selling. So there's going to be your initial cost, and then there's going to be SSAs.
I think that's a surprise to a lot of people, though. I don't think a lot of the end users recognize that. I think you buy the system, and then you expect the maintenance cost for the system, and all of a sudden this SSA pops up, and it's like, wow, this is not something that they're thinking about, considering or even budgeting for.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's very important that be identified to the end user right at the front end. Again, these, the SSAs are a necessary element of the system design and of the budget, but it should also be pointed out, like you say, that, warranty for product is also a necessary, element, but you need that glue that ties it all together, which is what the integrator brings, and the experience in the deployment of solutions. When it gets to the analytics, understanding where those applications are going to make sense, or where it's going to be more problematic and just generate a lot of information that's not going to be usable, given the use case, by the end user. So open communication and collaboration between the manufacturer, the integrator, the end user, and what have you, and the GC understanding that, so that it is all holistically integrated and supported, because that's where compliance is a relevant piece. But like I say, you can have one cert from a particular manufacturer on a project. Well, that's great. At least you're recognized by the manufacturer that you're certified. But it's a lot different when you have 100 people and $100 million worth of experience, with a platform versus one guy that you just happened to send to class, 2 weeks ago to pick up the cert. Right. So yes, it's compliant, but experience really gives you the perspective to be the value added, to bring the value added to the relationship. So with that, we'll bring it to the end for segment 2 and state that you are, again, listening to the Risk Advisor podcast hosted by Jim Henry and Sal Lafreri. We invite you to comment on our blog at theriskadvisor.com and to subscribe and follow us on our social media like Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We're going to ask you do so as a favor and go to the show listing, download it, and please write a review and like us. Your opinion matters to us. We would also like you to share this podcast with your friends and colleagues so we can get the word out about our show. So moving on to segment 3, horror stories. We'll try and keep this one short and go to the David Letterman top 10, as they say. Sal, you've got a little experience in this area here. Why don't you tee this one up?
We'll kick this one off. Doing consulting for a client, and it's a turnstile project, and the entire job was probably about $500,000. And the bids come in, and there's a difference of about $10,000 between the first place and second place. And we sit down with the powers that be, with the C-level folks, and we're talking about it. And I said that my recommendation was that we were going to go with the company that, came in the highest, which was $10,000, again, over a $500,000 job. And they look at me and they go, why? And I said, well, in reality, it's going to be the cheapest insurance policy that you're going to get because we know the job's going to get done right. I had some questions about company number 2, company number 3. Figured company number 1 would be at $10,000. Tried to explain it's a $10,000 insurance policy. They decided, that's okay. We're going to go with the cheaper company. And I just threw my hands up and said, okay, it's all I can do is I can advise, right? As the consultant, you can't get wrapped around the axle, right? You learn in the beginning, you take it to heart when they don't listen to you. After a while, you realize, you're getting paid for your advice and it's up to them to do what they want. They wound up going ahead with this other company. And interestingly enough, I got the big laugh out of it. When they went to set the turnstiles, they set them all wrong. And they wound up having to rip the turnstiles out. They had to go through all of the core drilling, all of the piping, all of the electric again. And it wound up costing them probably about another $200,000 by the time all was said and done on it. And I just sat there and looked at the CEO and never even said, I told you so. I just kind of looked at him.
Yeah.
It happens. It's those stupid things that occur. But you guys have to have way more experience in this than I do.
Well, I think some of the, you just have to when you know that they're going down that road, you have 2 choices. You can call them out for being as stupid and myopic as they are, but that's generally not a good career move. So, what I've found, has the greatest return is to be respectful and say, I'm sorry, that you're making that decision, but here are some things to watch out for going forward. So, just kind of seeding those I told you so's in a friendly, supportive manner. We value the relationship. We look forward to additional business, but, here are some things that you just might want to keep an eye out for. And sure enough, they more often than not, they come to bear. And I think some of the best jobs are the ones that I didn't get the first time, but seeded those concerns. It's there's a reason why we have a cost structure that we do, because it's expensive, to keep the right people, to give them the right training, to share those experiences within the business. It's the experience, Howard, that you spoke to earlier. And, it's a challenge, again, to not be condescending, to the other stakeholders that you're working with. But history will repeat itself if you don't remind people of that history.
Right.
they have short memories, and when the budgets get tight, and people are looking for ways to cut costs. There's a right way to do it and there's a wrong way to do it. I say, one scenario I know we were faced with, there was a network design that came on one project, and the budget that came in for basically the backbone for the network for the project was in the millions of dollars. It dwarfed the entire security budget for the project. And fortunately, in this case, and this goes back to my experience, I happened to be with Dusabello as well. And so Phil Santor says to me, he says, "So Jim, what are we going to do here? This is, I said, you know what? I said, it's not that the IT consultant did a bad job. They called out a great network, right? But it's unnecessary for let's think about what we're doing here. This is not a trading floor where microseconds matter, for the security system. We can more than adequately for 10% of this grandiose, sonnet that was being, designed, provide in a dual redundant, fiber backbone and a network and still have more than enough headroom for anything that we can foresee, putting onto the network. And it worked out great. So yes, you can, encounter problems like that where you say, well, how do I get 90% of the cost out? If there's a will, there's a way. And it can be done effectively, but it all comes down to communications and collaboration.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So, it always reminds me of the story, and I've actually said it to customers when, we get into this price thing, about the old ladies who keep going to the same restaurant, even though the food is terrible, but they keep going because, the portions are big and it's cheap. And they keep going to the same restaurant, even though the food's terrible. But we run into that all the time, where there's always churning in our industry. Over time, what tends to happen is, different administrations come in, the folks you've been dealing with over many years, they leave, somebody else comes in. Why is your maintenance so high? The typical question. Well, the maintenance is X because you have $1 million in equipment there, and we have to come and we service your system, and we take care of the labor, we take care of the parts. Well, we really just don't understand why it's so much. Well, it's your decision. If you don't want to, buy maintenance, it's your decision, but understand that, the maintenance contract customers, get service first. Okay. Typical, one of the situations we had, a big law firm, they got rid of their maintenance. They were looking to save money. I remember talking to them about it and saying, look, there are things when you have a maintenance contract, you don't have to go crazy looking at every service ticket, because there's many times where there's repeat calls because we have to come back to troubleshoot it, or it's a particular device and not all the devices are on all the service vehicles. So we have to come back. I'm just have a concern. You're not used to seeing that type of stuff. No, it's fine. It's great. Sure enough, they dropped the maintenance contract. Several months go by. We're doing everything time and material. And the next thing that happens is, you guys are coming here an awful lot to repair the system. What's going on? Well, first of all, your system's 10 years old. That's not, that's number one. Number two, we got to come there. If you call us, we come, we troubleshoot the best we can, and we take care of the system. Yeah, but it seems like when you're doing this, you're changing the most expensive parts first. Listen, nobody in this business has the control over their technicians in the field that they're telling them to use the most expensive equipment first. They're just troubleshooting. They're technicians. This is what they do. But again, it just speaks to the point. It's, penny wise and dollar foolish. And, whether it's maintenance contracts, whether it's SSAs, whether it's going for inexpensive equipment, at the end of the day, it winds up costing more money. And
Well,
a lot of it is even just aggravation.
Right. One of the things that also gets down to education of a customer, back in the, again, dating myself to the 60s, 70s, and 80s, it was easier for the customer.
I'm glad you can remember back that far, Jim. That's good.
It was easier back in those days, actually, to justify your maintenance agreements because, you were always on site.
Yeah.
I mean, in those days, you weren't remoting in. You didn't have the software support. You didn't have the professional services. Maintenance truly was, the truck out there, changing limit switches and pan and tilts and tubes and cameras and what have you. It was very hands-on, and there was a lot of time spent in the field. Now, the support has become more virtual. The software support agreements, a lot of the back end work, the professional services are all provided, by the integrator as a bridge between the end user and the manufacturer. And it's an education process that the customer needs to understand. Just don't count the number of times you see a technician, with his head under your desk or in your equipment rack. That is not the only thing that the integrator is providing you. So, providing some narrative, or some, audit trail of the different activities that you provide under service agreements is really key in having them understand that they're getting, appropriate value.
That is a great point. I left it out, but I would agree with you that I would say right now 50% of our service is probably done remotely, with IT people looking at systems because of the driver problems, interface problems, glitches in the software, you name it. It's what goes on right now. The beauty of the fact that most of our systems are now in, working via the network, which, by the way, is another issue. I mean, we know right away, we get that call over the weekend that several or maybe 20 or 30 cameras went down at the same time. Now, we know from experience 20 cameras did not break down. What we know is, oops, the IT department was doing some fiddling around with the network over the weekend, which is when, of course, they normally do it. And we get the call at 2:00 in the morning on Saturday. That's why things went down. They decided to take our IP addresses for somebody else, all these wonderful things that now go on, which, again, sometimes you're talking about the 70s and 80s, makes you long for coax again in the ceiling. But unfortunately, that's not going to happen.
Then you
have to train the customers also how to change the dates now, because you can't have the VCR just sitting there blinking with date on it forever and ever with the wrong date from 1960. Yeah.
Well, when the crisis occurs, where they have a bunch of cameras that are down. Some end users will want the visibility of, there's their bucket truck up there, up at the camp, so that the stakeholders can see what's going on. And what really is happening is it's behind the scenes. You've got to have the network guys in there trying to figure out what's going on, and it may not be as visible that you're reacting to the problem, but that assessment of the problem will save a lot of wasted time. Whether it's a delay in getting the repair, if it's under maintenance contract, or if it's T&M and they just want the busyness of a bunch of technicians showing up at where all the camera sites are that are down. That's not the most efficient way to attack it. You have to be using your judgment there. So again, it's all education of the customer.
Correct,
guys. I think we've just about run out of time. But Howard, we want to thank you for joining us today. Having this conversation. I think this is something we got to have you back and just have a roundtable discussion about this. Anyway, you've been listening to the Risk Advisor podcast hosted by Jim Henry and me, Sal LaFurry. We're going to ask you to subscribe to the show and like us on our social media sites like Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Remember that you can hear the show on your favorite podcast platform. And of course, you could always stream it at theriskadvisor.com. Once again, thank you for coming in, and thanks for listening, and we hope you tune in next week.